Erin. I'm very happy you're all here. These are our monthly sessions to dive into a specific topic. So today we're going to be talking about the brutal math of customer acquisition and really going through like if you are having maybe issues generating pipeline or taking a potential lead and bringing them into an actual deal that has some money and some timelines associated. We're going to go through what that looks like today and how to navigate the whole process. So, before we get into, how to find more people and maximize everything and do a great job, I figured it's probably helpful to start with a couple definitions. Because I'm going to be using some sales vernacular that's like kind of annoying, honestly, but it is really helpful when you're talking about the sales process, and generating a bunch of leads. Because as we all know, there's a difference between a cold lead and a warm lead. There's actually a couple different categories. So I just want to make sure we're all speaking the same language before getting into it. So, first of all, the main category, as you probably can imagine, is just like a lead, right? So anyone that you think is someone that might benefit from your product or service is a lead. Theoretically, like anybody could be a lead. You can just call a random person your lead. Doesn't mean they're going to be a good lead, but that's kind of like the coldest of the cold is someone that you're just saying, hey, I think that this person over here might be a potential customer in the future. And so what happens is that once you identify people, there are certain tactics that you can use to basically like suss out if that contact would actually end up becoming a customer before you actually like pitch them on your product or service before they have to pay you. So the two stages of like warm leads is first a marketing qualified lead, also known as MQL, is those are people who have identified or interacted with you in a certain way that makes you think that they might need what you have. So, to make it like super clear, all of you are MQLs to me because you're interacting with, a free piece of content or a free offer or whatever, a marketing initiative that you're putting on for the organization. And so, what you in specific define an MQL, like you can decide what that means for you, right? So you could make it as, as open and wide as anyone that replies to an email ever, or like anyone that likes your LinkedIn post, or, you can set the boundaries of what counts as an MQL. For me, it's anyone who's subscribed to our newsletter, attended an event, or maybe people that I've had a lot of like communication with over time about their business. But MQL is just someone that you're like, based on your activity and your actions, I think that you might actually be someone who I should talk to more. Once someone becomes an MQL, the thing that makes them go from MQL to an SQL, which is a sales qualified lead, is that you've actually had a one-on-one conversation with them. So as people are subscribing to your newsletter or attending your events or, interacting with all of your marketing content, your job as someone who's probably doing marketing and sales is to try to get all of those MQLs to book time with you. And so that is the process of building pipeline because there are all these people that are like, I'm like kind of interested in this webinar, for example. But if you want to see if they're actually going to be a good potential customer for you, you need to get them on a call and you need to have a conversation with them to understand their particular situation, right? So, an SQL is someone who you've had a call with, so you've already talked to them, and you have decided that they definitely need your solution. They have a relatively urgent timeline to solve that problem that your business solves. And the person you're talking to has the ability and the authority to make decisions and like sign contracts. So that would mean like if you're talking to an intern, maybe you need to talk to like a senior manager or a VP or a CEO or whatever. Only once you've had that initial call with the contact and you've decided, okay, they definitely have a real need, they have a timeline, they have authority, then If that person continues to move forward into the sales process with you and say, okay, let's like talk about negotiation and pricing and quotes and contracts and all that thing, then only in that sales process, when you're actively going through the quoting process and all of that, is that person now an opportunity. And opportunities are just like contacts that have an open deal. So if you're using a CRM, which is a customer relationship management system or customer management system, CMS, um, then these different tags are kind of default on the like contacts. There's a separate table for deals that you can work through, and that happens later on. Um, but these are the four stages that a specific person or a specific contact can be tagged with. Does anyone have any questions about this or how it applies to their specific case? Because I know a lot of times people conflate like leads and customers with partners. So is anyone like unclear about how this applies to their specific situation? When we're navigating the sales process, it's a bit fuzzy at the beginning because you could be starting the conversation with like your user. But ultimately, the person that needs to sign and has the authority might be like their boss or their boss's boss. So when you're going through the sales process, and when you have that first intro call with that contact, who might be the user or it might be the intern, right? Then before you finish that first call, best practice is to be like, okay, who is the authority? Like, if you haven't decided or you haven't discussed whether or not they have authority, then that's one of the last questions that you ask before you book the next meeting. Because you say, okay, if you need to bring in, like, what other stakeholders do we need to bring in? Okay, maybe we need to bring in finance, legal, my boss, my boss's boss. Then you basically need to test that user to say, like, okay, I know that you understand the need for this, but we need to bring in your leadership so then we can discuss whether or not like the broader team or the broader business understands the need for it, because you ultimately need to be able to convince the authority, of course, that there is a broader kind of like strategic or broader business need for your solution, because those are the people that will sign the papers. And if you can't get to authority, then it's very low likelihood that you're going to close that deal. Sometimes SQL and opportunity gets a bit fuzzy because you're navigating so many people. Um, but yeah, definitely making sure that you can work through that business case. And if you're doing the quoting, that's usually you're kind of leaning more towards the opportunity side because they're in the consideration phase now. But an SQL is someone where you're like, okay, I like it's a bit of a vibe check, honestly. It's not so black and white, but you can be like, yeah, they're like a good enough person, they have a big enough need, and they think that they can get their leadership on board, or a buying committee. Just to finish off one thought that I had from Ben's question. Sometimes your like lead and opportunity is not just one person. Sometimes it's like 10 people, depending on the size of the organization. And you're doing a lot of stakeholder management. That's more in enterprise sales, but can happen in small business as well. Let's get into percentages because this is where I start to break people's hearts a little bit. So, from thinking that someone can be a lead to closing a deal, obviously you're not going to have 100% of people you think are leads close the deal, right? So, based on industry standards and a sprinkle in of my experience as well, I've made or I've documented for each step what the average conversion rate is from going from one step to the next, because this is very important, right? So going from a lead to a marketing qualified lead, meaning like someone that you think is going to care about your solution, to somebody who takes some action, like sign up for your newsletter or whatever, participate in a webinar. Um, the rate of that is about 2 to 10%. Okay, so if you invite 10 people to, on the high end, if you invite 10 people to a webinar, one person will show up. And that's if you're prospecting quite well. So if you're really thinking about who you're inviting and you think you have a high chance of conversion. So it's about 2 to 10%. To go from an MQL to someone that books a call with you one-on-one is about 40 to 60%. This can vary quite a lot depending on how picky you're being about that MQL definition. Because again, if you're just calling like a LinkedIn like an MQL, you're probably going to be on the lower end of turning that person into someone who's going to book a call with you about your product, right? However, if you have like decently specific MQL boundaries, then moving that person onto a call and validating that they actually do need what you're offering will probably be up closer towards like the 60% range. And then going from an SQL, so somebody that you've had that first call with, to somebody who's going to open a deal and says, okay, let's like build a quote, let's get the contracting together. That is about 50 to 75% of people that make that jump. And again, that can vary a little bit, but usually if you're being really picky about your SQL conversations, like that first call is called a discovery call, and there's a whole framework to make the most out of the discovery call. If you want to talk about that, message me after. But going from SQL, if you're being really picky about who you're, and you're not like, it's called happy ears, and you're like, oh, they said they liked my thing, I'm going to make them a deal. Like, don't always do that. They have to have a real need. But if you're being picky about SQL, about 50 to 75% will turn into an actual deal that you work. And then from there, to go from an opportunity to a closed deal with signing on the dotted line, invoice out, is about 20 to 40%. Um, so you can see how you need to reach out to a lot of people and like have that initial request in order to close even one contact. So the way that you can think about this as well, I'm going to break this down almost like too much, so stop me if this is annoying. But on the lower end of this range, so if you're having a harder time converting people, you can probably see like a 0.08% close rate starting from lead all the way through to like closed signed deal. On the higher end, you're looking at about 2%. So it's a bit bleak out here, but that's okay because there are tactics that you can use to obviously like jack up the amount of people that you're reaching out to. Any questions about these numbers? I hope they're higher for you in practice, but I like to sandbag people a bit on this. Because if you have revenue goals and you think that every customer is going to bring you in like, I don't know, $2,000, then you can apply this formula. So on the higher range, the 1.8% close rate, then you would only need to reach out to 55.6 people to close that deal. It's just inverse. It's one over, right? On the low quality list, or also known as a B2C strategy, because you can't prospect consumers as well as you can prospect businesses, you need to reach out to over 1,000 people to close one deal. Roughly. Again, these are estimates. You can use your own sales metrics if you have it. But these are, I think, pretty good boundaries that we share. So in the example of maybe you want to make 200K in a year and your average customer value, aka spend, is about 2,200, then if you're making that low quality list, then you need to reach out to 113,750 people in that year to reach that annual revenue target, which is roughly 300 people a day. You do the math. I don't know if you have capacity to DM 300 people a day. Obviously, you could do like paid marketing, and there's a lot of ways that you could like throw money at this to hit these numbers. But that's kind of what you're looking at, assuming your B2C product is also priced at $2,200, which is like not the case. You can replace this with whatever the price is of your stuff. On the B2B side, this is so much easier because you can probably actually charge more like $2,200 per contract, probably more. But you can also have a high quality list that you're prospecting of the people you're going to spend your time reaching out to, right? Because you can use tools like LinkedIn, or there's, data providers like I always talk about Apollo, but like Apollo or ZoomInfo or one of those, where you can actually make filters to say like, okay, I want to reach out to like marketing VPs at companies with less than 500 employees and they're in this industry and they maybe have these keywords. It's really hard to prospect based on values, but you can prospect based on these like key metrics, which makes your prospecting better, more efficient, and therefore you can build that higher quality list and reach out to only 5,000 people in the year, or 13 people a day to hit that same revenue metric. 13 people a day is very doable. That's like, if you're slow, that's like 2 hours of outreach in the morning if you're being like really, really targeted. So, of course, these are just kind of example numbers at this point, and your actual conversion rates will vary. And if you're, a one-person shop, maybe you don't need to track like, lead to MQL to SQL to opportunity in this much detail. For context, at Impact Zero, I'm usually just tracking like MQLs and opportunities because I'm doing all of the sales myself. Same thing when I was at Carbon Hound before. We eventually tracked all of them, but in the early days, you're like, I just need to know my hot leads and I just need to know my opportunities. Like that's all it is. Keeping in mind that you're qualifying the whole time. But these are kind of the rough outreach metrics that you would want to aim for success. But yeah, Apollo is a great tool for getting emails and getting phone numbers. That's like what it does for people that don't know. You can like search a company and search a role, and it'll be like, this is the person. Here's their email. Here's their phone number. It also gives you mobile numbers, which is like kind of sketchy. I don't use that because that's like very invasive to me. And people have yelled at me when I do that by accident in my early days. So don't do that. But what's more important is making sure that when you're building that list, you're building it off of a hypothesis that you've created, which I will get into in 2 seconds. I'm going to go into Ben's question first, and then Ash, yours is the slide after this, because it is slightly different when you're it's like there's a difference between like sales conversations and product research conversations. They're very, very similar, but to your point, the way of going about it is very different. So Ben, for your question of like, okay, Apollo exists, ZoomInfo exists. I know I can like, LinkedIn even, you can just search people. Um, but when you're building your list and if you're picky about prospecting and if you're strategic about who you're reaching out to, you're going to see the higher end of those conversion rates. So you'll be closer to only needing to reach out to like 55 versus like, 113,000. And so what we do with people, and I think I've got webinars about this. So, there's an article on the Impact Zero website about how to build a hypothesis, which I'll send out after this. But the way to make sure that you're being strategic about who you're reaching out to and you're being mindful about it is by working through hypotheses. Because what a hypothesis is, first of all, is a combination of like a real deep customer problem, meaning like how are they losing money, losing time, losing employees, insert whatever like business problem, right? So it's a real business problem mixed with the persona. So the person at the company who's responsible for that area or that problem is their problem to solve, plus a value proposition, which is how does your solution solve that business problem? Not how does it solve a sustainability problem, because people don't buy out of the goodness of their hearts. It's how does what happens to be a sustainable solution solve a business problem? And whenever you're doing your outreach, you're framing it in that way to be like, hey, we do this. Curious if you're experiencing this problem. Let me know if you want to chat. By the way, like we happen to have great values too. And you can connect with people on like that personal level. But a lot of your outreach and if you do cold calling or if you do cold emailing or even cold DM on LinkedIn should be around a specific hypothesis. Because say, for example, my hypothesis is I'll use a sponsorship hypothesis for Impact Zero, for example. So I know that service providers who sell to entrepreneurs and startups, and maybe they have like B2B software that's like built for small businesses, right? They have a hard time finding those small businesses because they're not always available in, prospecting tools, and they're like kind of undercover sometimes and hard to build relationships with because startups and founders are so overwhelmed. So my persona for people that want to access startups is people in sales or people in marketing within B2B software. So say like accounting software. So my value proposition to the person in sales or marketing who's having trouble reaching small businesses is, hey, Impact Zero has a community of like over 200 small business owners that are also bonus working on climate. Let me know if you would like to like help me provide value. Like they have to give us like some sort of discount. So it's like give us a discount and we'll give you access to the community to offer that discount that they can't find anywhere else. And oftentimes people are very keen to do that. We do a sponsorship agreement. It's like great, it's a win-win for everybody, right? So thinking about how your solution solves that real business or real customer problem is really important. There's a list of what like counts as like a real problem in that article on our website about building a hypothesis. But that's the gist of when you are starting to build. Like step one is always like, what is your hypothesis? Make a guess. You don't have to be confident in it. Just start somewhere. Because when you're actually now going out and finding these customers, first of all, there's no blanket strategy. It's like, do I cold call? Do I email? Do I LinkedIn DM? I'm like, I don't know. It depends on who your persona is. Like, where do they spend their time, right? And your job is to figure out where they are and go meet them there. But Ash, to your question, like if you're just getting started, then you need to think about this hypothesis still is always step one, and then reach out to people in your warm network who fit that persona and just be like, hey, can I just like validate some assumptions with you? Like, I want to know what your life is like. Do you even care about this? Am I even like on the right track at all? And having those conversations in the beginning will eventually, once you're on the right track, will eventually lead into sales conversations. That's how you get your first couple customers, is by doing like really deep product discovery, get them to like really care about what you're doing because they have stake because they're like, wow, if you could solve this, I would love to pay for it. And they'll just like convert really fast when you're ready for them. So even if you're in like the product design or product development phase, I always say like it's never too early to start doing this hypothesis testing. If anything, you should be doing hypothesis testing before you even have a product in your mind, because then you're building in response to pain points and customer needs. You're not trying to like make pain points and customer needs like fit what you've already built. So for context, for people that don't know, like Impact Zero, we've worked with like 50 startups like very closely over the last 5 years. And the people that make the most traction or like see the most traction are the ones who are willing to completely rethink their hypothesis, completely rethink their value prop, and just listen to customers and hear what they're saying and then act accordingly. Perfect. Okay, great. Yes, never stop reaching out to people. Like especially technical founders. Like if you guys are technical founders, they technical founders love to like think and just like stay in their office and like never talk to anyone. But I feel like I'm always like peeling like CTOs like out of their comfort zone or like co-founders. So yeah, always when in doubt, go talk to some customers and it'll keep you humble. In terms of length, when you're just getting started, like if you're not really like fluent in discovery, it's actually better to book like 45 minutes to an hour if you can. So then you can fumble your way through the discovery process. Once you get like really laser and like you know your hypothesis and you know the signals to look for, then like half an hour is good. And the reason is because the conversation for sure is 20 minutes. The last 10 minutes of the call is being like, okay, what are your next steps? If we know your timeline is this, you need to solve this problem. Okay, like what's happening on your side? Do you have a meeting to approve this? Do you have a budget timeline? And like it's just talking about the logistics. So the last like 5 to 10 minutes is with your prospect, like, okay, who else do we need to invite? Let's book the call. Always book the call when you're on the next one. So 20 minutes is good for the convo, but you always need the extra time to book next steps. Otherwise, you risk them never replying to your emails again. So just like maintaining control of the deal through action and like pushing it forward and matching their timeline requirements. Because you can say, if you need this implemented by, it's May right now. So say they need to have something implemented by like July, then like work backwards with them in those last 10 minutes to say, okay, well then like we need to have contracts signed here and like you need to have your onboarding for your team here. And then then by backtracking, you can say, oh, we actually need to get this contract signed like next week. So let's talk to your boss tomorrow. And that's how you can get the urgency up because you're following their timelines and working backwards and basically building a project plan where one step in that project plan is just signing the contract. And if you're still in that, like, we don't know if we're going to move forward and like, we don't know if we fully need this yet, don't ever give them pricing straight up because What you can do, though, I'll actually caveat that. What you can do is say starting at or a range or something like a ballpark. That goes really far because they can immediately disqualify that themselves on budget because that's one of the qualification pieces. Um, but once you actually get into the quoting process, because you're like, okay, great, we know that we can do between 10 and 15K. That's like good enough for me to get my boss on the call. Once you have the boss on the call and finance and anyone else who's a stakeholder, then you use that quote building pricing conversation as another opportunity to do discovery and co-create the quote with them. Because imagine there are two scenarios, right? The first scenario, you've built the quote top to bottom, it's a PDF, you just present it on the call or you email it to them or you present it to them on the call as though it's like a fixed quote. What happens in that scenario is that prospect will go, something's off here. It's like a small little minor tweak, but like it's not right. And my boss is asking me a bunch of questions. And this other vendor like guessed right or built it with us. And so because your quote like doesn't seem flexible, and I'm assuming it's not flexible because people make that assumption, this actually doesn't work and we're going to move forward to someone else. So you lose the deal immediately. Versus scenario two, where you say, okay, totally, like I've got your quote built for you, but before I actually send it and make it a PDF, I want to make sure that I've understood your needs correctly and you're only paying for the things that you actually need. So what you do in that quote conversation is do a bit of discovery. Just be like, hey, how are things? What's changed? Timeline's good? Yes. Budget's good? Yes. Okay, next. Then when you're on the quote, you literally pull it up on Excel or on a Word doc or whatever you're using. And it's really effective to start the conversation by saying, okay, this is how the quote works. This is how our pricing model works. It's very clear. It's like you're paying for this, you're paying for this, you're paying for this. This is what sums up to this total. When you're doing that quoting process, it helps to be able to track every line item and match it to a specific pain point that they've said to you in earlier discovery conversations. So, for example, you can say I have a software, right? You can be like, okay, so there's a base software fee, can't get over that. That's like cost of having this conversation. But we've added, live onboarding where someone on our team will help you do the onboarding process because that's so annoying and I know that people hate that. We've also added on a bunch of these extra features that are typically locked if you just have the base package, but we've added these features because you said that you need XYZ, and that's part of the value of working with us. So when you're presenting all of this to them, then you can say, any red flags, any yellow flags? Is there anything you want me to change? Is there anything you think will be hard to convince or explain to finance or the people that you're having to get this approved by? And so when you're going through that quoting process, it is literally just a working session. It's not a presentation. And you say, okay, export, send. Now we're done because we had the conversation. Like any other call, it's very important at the end of that quoting conversation to be able to say, okay, like when are you presenting this to finance? Next week? Okay, let's meet on Thursday because you're presenting it on Wednesday. So let's like book that time. Are you free? Are you not free? Again, always booking the next step. And so that's where the quote, it's kind of the same process with the contract as well. Like every material, every deck, any kind of like collateral that they ask for is a working session because that's an opportunity and that's your leverage to maintain contact because you're not going to give away the next thing unless you have buy-in from them and you have what you need in order to keep the deal moving forward. There was like a million and a half things that we can talk about, and I'm like going down a pricing rabbit hole a bit. That is kind of the gist of how to find customers, make sure you're reaching out to enough customers. Like a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about is like the business ROI and like the hard like, the business benefit. But there's a lot to people having personal connections with what you're doing and like doing good. And so I'm happy that you brought that up because that's a huge thing that climate people can work on, especially in the early days, is to say like who is your biggest champion because they just like are so passionate about what you're working on. I know like Impact Zero, we've had a ton of people in the early days that have helped with that. So it's good to know that you've got some of that going on too, even not as a nonprofit, because we're a nonprofit. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I need hearts and minds, but collaborating with nonprofits to do kind of like immersive events is like such a thing right now. And then Krithi mentioned collaborating with other startups, groups, to offer free. Yeah, totally. Collaboration is like fully the way. And I think like especially in the last couple of years, um, people are coming away from, digital social media marketing because like algorithms are just a hellhole now. So like people want, you know, personal connections and like they want to show up and they want to do things in person that are just like fun and different. Um, so I think that I'm not like super surprised that like the events are definitely a thing for sure. On that note, if you want to come to Impact Zero's event, we have a bonfire on May 29th, which is super fun. But also, I would be really keen for those of you who are working on this and are making sure that, the value prop and your messaging is like actually going to like help yield some results. Um, then like, and if you want help with it, then book time with me and we can talk about like your specific business because these group sessions are really great for like covering, theory and like high level concepts, but it's very important to also have some time to think about how this applies to you. And I know that it's so critical to have that. So if you do want to book an hour and just talk about your hypotheses and your traction so far and like kind of brainstorm how to position yourself, I'm very open to that. So do that. And then if you want to come to our Climate Founder Club, come hang. It's in Toronto in the West End. But I see there's one more question in the chat, so I just don't want to miss it. How do you take donations? I mean, donation software, there's many. I personally our website's hosted on Squarespace and I just have Stripe hooked up to it. I've also used PayPal donations in the past. But if you are so we're a nonprofit, we're not charity. If you're a charity and you need to issue charitable receipts, then you'll need a whole other software for that. But you can just take donations, however, as long as you're doing good accounting to track what's like a donation versus revenue versus grants versus whatever. But we can talk about that another time if you want to do our one-on-one. Okay, cool. I think that's everything. I'm gonna stay on until 1 because I'll hang if you have questions. But as promised, you have a little bit of time left to go get some snacks, go make a tea. I don't know, do whatever you want. Thanks so much for coming, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.